bottom, you should see a box that, or what looks like a little talk window that says chat. And we want to make sure everybody can use that. The chat window will be used for, like I said, the motion to vote and a second, and will also be used for any questions you might have. Elizabeth is helping us today. She is not far from us right now in the corner of the courtyard, and we'll be
chat. So when they take a vote,
so Elizabeth, as our moderator, may have to mute you, and you do have the capability to unmute yourself during the meeting. But for the most part, because of the fact that we've got a large number of people here, we're going to be doing so much of the interaction either via chat or visually. So again, use the chat window for questions or comments, or if you have a motion. But when we go through the voting, what we're going to ask you to do is actually raise your hand so we can visually see the votes. And I'm going to ask you to keep your hand raised until we ask you to lower your hand. That will be the way for us to determine what the voting is and whether or not the motion has passed. I think that covers the specifics about the logistics. Elizabeth, do we have everyone with the names correctly on here? No. No. There's someone we need to ask to change their name.
Could that be June?
So just a reminder, your microphone should be muted at this point. We will let you know when you need to unmute it.
Yeah.
I think it might be June on the iPad.
Okay.
Sure it is. Okay, Martha just got muted.
Good job, June.
We have somebody who is iPad still.
Oh, yeah.
So if you are on and you are iPad, if you could please identify yourself or change your name.
hey.
Yeah, Krista.
Sounds good.
There we go.
Thank you for your patience as we're working through the logistics here, and we will call the meeting to order just shortly.
Okay. Think we're good?
All right, I think we're ready to call the meeting to order. My name is Holly Lucky. Some of you may not recognize me because of the mask, or you maybe haven't had a chance to meet me. I'm really happy today to be with all of you virtually on Zoom, Happy to be sitting here in the courtyard at Grace with Pastor Matt and Wyatt Ritchie, and looking forward to the conversation today. And special thanks to Elizabeth for moderating as well. I think we will get kicked off here, and I will pass it to Matt for the opening prayer.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let us pray. Good and gracious year, good and gracious God, this has been a crazy year. We ask for your presence with us at this time as we think about all of the amazing things that you have done over this last year, all of the things that have come to pass in our lives and in this world, and our continuing work to do your will in this world in these days. We have much to be grateful for. Please be present with us in this conversation, that we might hear your voice and that we might experience your spirit. Amen.
Amen. Before we get into the business, I want to make sure we're recording. So
Yeah.
You are? We're good. All right. So the next order of business is to review the minutes from last year's congregational meeting, which is in the next page of the annual meeting report. So I will give you just a couple minutes to quickly glance through that. Most of last year's report was pretty similar to the format that we're following this year, with review of financials, review of the progress that had been made at Grace, voting on the proposed budget, and then some business related to the council and the nominating committee. When we have someone who's willing to do so, we are looking for a motion to approve the minutes in the chat window, please. So we're looking for a motion and a second in the chat window.
Mark approves.
Mark has moved to approve the minutes. We need who's that first second? Carol has the first second. Great, thank you. All right, here's our chance to practice the voting. So I love the enthusiasm. Thank you. So here's how we're going to do it is I will ask everyone who agrees or approves, all those in favor of approving the minutes, please raise your hand and leave your hand raised. So,
I think that carries it.
all right. Any, you can lower your hands. Thank you. Any opposed? Please raise your hand. All right. It looks like the motion has carried. Thank you. So we have approved the minutes from last year's congregational meeting. And again, I will pass it off to Pastor Matt to review the reports in the annual meeting.
Thank you. A few things as we take a look at the reports. I'm going to kind of shift through the pages, and Elizabeth could help me keep an eye on the chat window. If there are any committee chairs that would like to say a quick word, that would be very appropriate. You can see we have a number of great things going on. You can see our statistics. It's kind of hard to compare statistics, although these are calendar years. So this was 2019 and 2018. You can see that our membership went up a touch. Our average worship attendance went down a touch. We had more baptisms. We had the same number of confirmations. We had some new members and a significantly reduced number of deaths, which was great. So we'll shoot for that kind of number going forward. As you can see also in the lower right, a little preview of Wyatt's conversation perhaps is a little bit of a running piece on our income, which I think has some value in noticing. Our operating budget in 15-16 was $535,000. Our actual giving from this last fiscal year, 19-20, is 704,000. So really remarkable growth in giving, and all of these numbers, even though some of them are moving around a little bit, show continued strength and vitality in the congregation. We have not been keeping rigorous detailed notes in regards to the attendance on Sunday mornings now. The YouTube numbers, it's kind of hard to know what value they have aside from comparison from one week to the next, but our participation in worship continues to seem very high. So, Pastor Frederica's report. You can see there's a lot going on there. I'll invite all the staff to say a quick word if they like. Since I'm just throwing Pastor Frederica in without notice, we'll skip ahead perhaps to Tim and Elizabeth. Why don't you guys jump in the chat window to me, and we'll go ahead and get you going.
Are you, should I say something?
Go for it.
Well, thanks. Thanks for the notice. I'm listening, you see. Yeah, confirmation has been quite exciting, of course, with the changes even more. But I've had a good year. We had 16 confirmands, and we had, I think, a lot of fun, at least I had, with all our different approaches to discover our faith and talk about it. And we also, I also added last year to our programming the Women's Night Out, which we have shifted to Zoom, and we have added it, plussed it to twice a week now, twice a month now. But there's usually quite a good attendance, and I think especially now it's a very good opportunity to talk. And a special feature we've added this year, just a little advertisement for all those of you that don't know about it yet. We have a speaker. So once a month we have the social meeting, the first meeting of the month, and the second meeting, which is the third Thursday. There we have a speaker. And just last Thursday we had a speaker who was talking to us about the centennial of the women's right to vote, and it was a really interesting meeting, really insightful. I think that's it. We continue to do our job no matter what, I think, and it's a challenge and it's also fun. So I'm glad you're joining us in that. That's it.
There we go.
I'm going to share a screen then, Elizabeth.
So you're showing my, oh man, I have to take my headset out. You are muted. Can everyone hear me?
There's an echo, some kind of feedback.
I don't know how to fix that. It's always funny to write these annual reports because you've moved on so quickly to what's coming next, then you have to look back. And it seems so long ago to think about last summer and last year and how different that looks from now. But we had a great year last year. One of the fun things that we did was we updated the worship bags that are used very frequently by young ones during worship. And we made them liturgical colors, and so we switched those out with the seasons. Another big thing that happened last year was my sabbatical. So for Lent and Holy Week and Easter, I was traveling and away and finding rest, which invigorated me to come back and to serve here. I'm so thankful for that time away and for all the people who stepped in to fill in when I was away, especially the Children, Youth, and Family team. Who supports me in all that I do and all the programs that we put on place. Last summer, we took our high school youth to Montana, which is always a really great favorite trip. And it's sad that this summer we weren't able to take any trips, but we look forward to a future where we get to do fun things like go to camp and recreate all those things again. The summer has been interesting and difficult, but we've continued to have Zoom youth group every single week. I think we're on week 20 of having Zoom youth group every Wednesday. And so it's such a joy to spend time with your children and youth and families online in these weird, strange days. And I'm thankful for a new year ahead.
Unmute.
Great.
I think we got there. Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. I wanted to mention as well as we look through these reports quickly, if there are any committee chairs that wanted to mention anything. I know we've had quite a busy season with property as well as with social ministry. And so if there are any additional words that would like to be said on that front, children, youth, and family as well. We just heard from Elizabeth. Wednesday work crew, very busy. Thank you for the notes there, Steve. Advance through. Library. Stewardship, I think it's good to mention the stewardship team's work this year. It was quite unusual, and we thank you for all of those who have responded to the pledge survey that we did a little differently this year, but we were very happy to see how many were able to respond in these different days. Social ministry. Bruce, if you had something you wanted to highlight in particular, or Mary and Mark in regards to property, just mention it in the chat and I'll put you on. But social ministry has done a number of things, and in particular, during these last few months, the EHP food drives has been a huge thing on the first Saturday, and we're starting to see more people from the community participate as well, which has been a lot of fun to see as well. I'd like to thank Dale Lepp for helping get that set up, and good things to come. And it sounds like there is going to be a habitat opportunity in the near future as well. So please keep your eyes open for the details on that in the emails to come. Property. I wanted to mention a lot going on that front as we've been remembering Barbara in her, Barbara Roberts moving down to live with her daughter. We have for several years from the time in which Les Roberts passed away, a sizable amount of money in the memorial fund that was always intended to be used for updating the kitchen in Brown Hall. And it was very exciting this last week to see the new new stoves put in place. Obviously you can see the new doors there. There's work in the courtyard. If you see in the lower image, you can see the space there that has been opened up, some slight change to the landscaping there. And so Brown Hall is, as we've been saying, is ready for business, and we want to get back in it. But obviously we're not quite there yet. Anyone else have anything that they wanted to mention in regards to the reports? Go ahead and message me there.
I just wanted to make a comment. This was mentioned in multiple reports, but I think it's necessary that we mention it out loud, that the video ministry that Andrew Mellows has done has just been fantastic this year. And so kudos and thanks to him and all of the work that he continues to do to help support us with the technology during this time.
Absolutely.
And Matt, I think this is Mark Cravens and Mary Cravens. We just wanted to re-emphasize our thank you to the entire congregation for the benevolence you've shown in supporting the Capital Fund. All the work that you're seeing in the pictures, the stoves, everything, All that came out of that fund. We'll be hearing more about its current status, but we just wanted to underline the fact that this community has really stepped up and we're able to do great things with your generosity. So thank you very much, and God bless.
Thank you, Mark. And to add one property item too, as we're saying thank yous, is to thank Barbara Larson. We had a world record short window time of turning over the second parsonage from one renter to the next. I believe it was 3 days vacant. So heroic work by Barbara Larson, and it is hugely appreciated. Thank you. So I think for most of the programs, you can see that there are other program pages in regards to preschool and CMT as well. I would say that as far as those programs are concerned, preschool is starting up this fall after having a very successful 3-week camp in the recent past here on campus. And so there's a lot of details and there's been a lot of stress and activity, but they are have done a lot of tremendous work and they're excited to be starting up in the fall. CMT, of course, is looking at next summer, this summer not being possible. And so our prayers continue to be with that part of our ministry as they look towards new days next summer. And I think that's pretty much it, unless there's somebody else programmatically that wants to chime in. If there is anybody that has a question about any of the reports and you'd like to put that in the chat window, or anything else along those lines. As we often like to say, you know how to find us. So if you have a question that comes up later, don't hesitate to be in touch. Yes, definitely. There's a shout out to Gretchen for the beautiful report. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Okay.
All right, I think then moving on from the reports, we'll pass it along to Wyatt to take us through last year's financials and the proposed budget.
Oops.
Oh, sorry.
So we'll go now to the less beautiful part of the annual report, which are the spreadsheets. And I was going to do a quick review of last fiscal year's results. I think we sent these out to the full congregation about a week ago, week and a half ago. Yeah. So these are numbers that were sent out. I thought, it's worthwhile at least highlighting briefly some of those numbers. And then we'll talk about the proposed budget for the current fiscal year. So, just highlighting in particular a few things. If you look at, towards the top of that page and in the upper left-hand corner, really revenues, and in particular, you can see envelopes, which, for the most part is, reflective of pledged and regular givers to the operating budget. And you can see that we, exceeded budget, for the last fiscal year, despite the fact that, several of those months, we were dealing with COVID and uncertainty. It just is a real reflection and testament to, kind of this congregation and the support that we have, amongst this community for the ministry. So, kudos to everyone that's part of that, which is all of you on this call. So thank you. And you can see, as a result, then total revenues, which includes, various, smaller line items, exceeded what we expected for the budget last year. So very strong from the revenue point of view. I can't do the math off the top of my head, but you can see it's about $20,000 roughly ahead of where we thought. I'm not going to go through the details of expenses. If anyone's got questions, we can talk offline or, in the chat, if you will. I would just flip the page to just total expenses. And you can see from an operating point of view, total expenses were slightly below budget. So, with revenues, ahead of budget and revenues slightly below budget, we actually had a more significant surplus from the operating budget going into this fiscal year. You can see, the fundamental surplus we had forecasted about $17,000. And you can see we actually had an operating budget of about $45,000 surplus. So we are entering, this year, in a really good place. Having said that, I do think that the finance committee and council felt there is some level of uncertainty. There still, hangs over us a bit of uncertainty as to where things will go for the rest of, the current fiscal year. And so with that, we thought some level of conservatism, as it relates to forecasting revenues and thoughts on budget was really, warranted. So with that, I will talk a little bit about the forecast, but before we go there, one more page, Matt, next page, just to review the capital budget. If you recall, we do have the operating budget and the capital budget. You can see just the comparison of what we had forecasted for a capital budget versus actual. It's a little bit harder to forecast the capital budget because, the primary revenues, other than the St. Clair rental, are the 3-year gifts that we get. Those are not quite, as, cyclical or as, kind of on time that we have with the operating budget. So we're a little bit short there. We'll talk about kind of what the forecast is for, the coming year. But as a result of slightly, under giving, we do then moderate, where we spend money and how we spend money relative to those projects. Obviously, there's a few things in the capital budget that we can't moderate, which is essentially the mortgage and taxes. So that is the one thing within the capital budget that we always are mindful of as we think about, what we can do and can't do, relative to the capital budget. So, with that, happy briefly to take any questions. As I said, this was sent to you, and if there are detailed questions, we can take that, offline at another moment, and we can really, turn to the budget for the next fiscal year.
Good. So questions in the chat window as we look backwards, as we look at this last year. I would just say from a little bit of perspective, looking out at the Senate, when I see our financials and as I see the budget that we're putting forward for this next year, we're in a really, really great spot. This is a very hard time for many organizations, and we're very blessed, and a lot of it has to do with your generosity and faith. So thank you. We'll wait just another quick second to see if there are any specific questions about this. If there's something you just have you're curious about, you're welcome to be in touch with us later as well.
Let's move to the budget. Yep. And I'm going to focus on the summary page that Matt will highlight. These are in your materials. It's the first page of what then is the detailed budget. My plan is not to spend time on the detailed budget, just really to go through, the high level, kind of voiceover that we have. You'll note in the detail, we've called out notes, relative to changes that we've made, just to give people a little bit of kind of color and perspective on some of the changes that we've made, in the budget. What you're looking at, as I said, is a summary. You can see, and it's a comparison. The gold is last year's budget, the one that we just compared actual to budget. And then what I guess darker gray is really this year's budget. So that is the budget that we will be voting on, but we've decided to give you a comparison of last year's budget to this year's budget. And you can see the top half of this page is the operating budget in summary form. And then the bottom half of this page is the capital budget in summary form. The details to both those budgets are in the following pages, and it's the same format of gold to gray. So hopefully, that's fairly straightforward. I think before I get into some of the high-level commentary, I do think, one thing I want to note, you'll see it's in these numbers, is we did apply for a PPP loan, which was the government program in support of making sure that organizations, both for-profit and not-for-profit, continue to support personnel and not make fundamental changes as a result of COVID. It was an emergency program. We did apply for that and did receive approval through the ELCA Credit Union. ELCA Credit Union. We will be applying for forgiveness of that loan, which will be, something that we're going to be doing here over the course of the next month or two. I can say with confidence that we will get that forgiven. I see no reason why we won't. And we've made an assumption that that loan will be forgiven in this budget, but I did want to highlight, that is really a bit of a one-time unusual aspect to the budget for this year, but certainly an important one, and gives us, some breathing room and some confidence as it relates to longer-term financial resources for the church. So with that, as I said, I'm comparing last year's, budget to this year's budget, from a regular income point of view, which is really, the pledged giving and the regular, donations that we get to support the operating budget at the top of the page. What we're forecasted is essentially a flat number for pledges. So we've chosen to just assume flat year over year as it relates to regular giving, for the church, despite this fact we beat budget last year. I think in light of, the pledges that we got, in light of some changes within the congregational mix, we chose to be a little bit conservative relative to regular giving. The 5,000 decrease is actually a result of not being in church. And I think that's mostly envelope giving. So given the fact that we're not here and we're not, continuing to see new faces, we decided to tail that back a little bit. And that's the fundamental difference between, the 703 and the 698 is really around, envelope giving. The other change in the income on the operating budget is also reflective of the fact that we're not using the campus. I think a big driver of that is just some of the facility usage fees that, have been pretty consistent, that we've historically received. Obviously, with, no one being able to use the facilities, we've also curtailed that back relatively significantly vis-a-vis last year's budget, this year's budget. So with that, those are the primary changes, in our expectations from a capital or from an operating income point of view. You can see, then the expenses. I think I'm not going to go through the details. As I said, there's, lots of details behind this. I think there's a few things worthy of highlighting. One is right now we've chosen, from a staff salary point of view, to be flat this year versus last year. Once again, I think it's a little bit of this conservatism, wanting to make sure we don't get too far out over our skis. I think there's a belief, if things transpire this year like they did next year, it's something that we probably might want to look at, in the middle of the year, just to discuss with council, have have the finance committee take a look at that. But I think, as I said, wanting to be a little bit conservative given the uncertainty, we chose to just have flat salaries year over year. I think the other big item, in this budget that's really worth noting, Matt had mentioned CMT and preschool are both ministries that are part of the church but are outside of these financials. Having said that, both of them provide some level of financial support for Gretchen's salary, because Gretchen does provide administrative services, for those ministries, as well as buildings and ground usage. Given, the situation with no CMT this year, and I know preschool's been under some financial distress as well, or just uncertainty, that we chose to essentially eliminate those support items from those ministries. And so, Gretchen's full salary, all the costs of running the campus are now borne in this budget, and we're not, essentially relying on those to help support those costs. So that's another big item in this budget, which is, causing, some of the increase in expenses relative to last year. I think the other thing, last year, you may recall, because we had a surplus, we did allocate $25,000 of the surplus in the operating budget to support the capital budget. Given things are a little bit tighter this year, that's been eliminated from the operating budget. So that $25,000 decrease is essentially, what was approved last year as essentially movement of operating budget surplus to support capital, budget activities. This year is being eliminated to minimize, the distress to the operating budget. Prior to, then the funds that we get from the PPP, with, the expectations of giving, with, fully burdening the expense load for administration and buildings and grounds, et cetera, flat salaries, et cetera, you'll see we have a $22,000 deficit in the budget. We're filling that hole, and we've got surplus going into the year. We also, as I'll detail, have PPP loan funds to fund that. So from a cash point of view, we're in a good spot. But as you think about just longer term, there are some things that we just need to be mindful of relative to the operating budget. And as I said, we've taken a little bit of a conservative tone to revenues, but felt like it was worthy of doing that in light of uncertainty. But there is an operating budget deficit this year relative to, I guess we had a slight deficit last year. As relates to the PPP loan, when we did our application, part of our application was inclusive of, funding, payroll for all our ministries, which included preschool. And we are funding, and you can see here, funding essentially 2 months of preschool payroll in that. So that 32,000 you can see was funding essentially, I think, May and June's payroll for the preschool as they kind of work through their own situation and issues. So of our total PPP loan, which was roughly $135,000, $32,000 is going to support the preschool payroll. The balance of that is going to essentially support, the overall payroll and other activities of the operating budget. So you can see with the PPP loan, we end the year actually increasing our operating fund or operating surplus relative to last year. So, we certainly, will be using those funds for good use, but at this point, we want to just kind of put them in reserve and see how the rest of the year unfolds. So that's the highlights of the operating budget. I think, as it relates to the capital budget, a couple of just notes, we have forecasted essentially, $115,000 of, giving relative to the capital budget. I think that's, that's a conservative number. It's less than the remaining pledges on the capital budget. This is the year we'll be closing out that capital budget. We will be talking about a capital campaign sometime in the relatively near future. But for this fiscal year, we're essentially using remaining pledges and some conservative kind of estimate of what will come in to fund the capital budget. As we've talked about, the other big item that contributes to our capital budget is St. Clair. As Matt noted, Barb did a fantastic job getting that changed over from one renter to a next. So that, continues to be, a great source of income to support capital budget activities. And you can see then from an expense point of view, we do have, some flexibility relative to expenditures and whatnot, other than the mortgage and the taxes. So, we've earmarked $25,000 for capital budgets. I'm not sure we've got specific, projects yet identified. I know there are a number of specific projects, but I'm not sure we've identified what the $25,000 is going for. And as you also recall, we do have, missions as part of the capital campaign. We do, provide resources to ministries outside of Grace, and so that's what that is. So, that will, have, a deficit in the capital budget. We also have some of the proceeds of the PPP loan going to essentially offset that. So you can see between the $96,000 above in PPP loan forgiveness relative to the operating budget and the $41,000 below, that's our total PPP loan. We've just allocated some of that between the two budgets to present to the congregation. So Matt or Holly, I don't know if I've missed anything that you think is.
I just wanted to mention, as Wyatt said, yes, we're looking ahead at this next year. There's a lot of uncertainty, so we've put some conservatism into it. But at this and as you mentioned, right, flat salaries for the staff, which we will revisit at the end of the year based on our financial position. But one thing I wanted to point out is we did maintain our 11% benevolence.
Good.
As part of this. So we did not change the target that we are we are applying towards the benevolence from any income that comes in.
The only thing that I would add is just to reiterate, there are a lot of congregations that'll be gathering over this season and next to have an annual meeting and look at their budget for the next year and wish that they had ours. So I think we're in a great spot, all things considered, and thankful for all the work that's gone into this. And again, to
And everyone on this call.
For your generosity made a huge difference.
So I think at this time we'll open it up for questions, which looks like we've got one here. Can you reread that for us?
The question is, I'm having trouble reconciling the net surplus shown on the year end with the net loss shown on the budget page for 1920.
The 84K versus the
the what?
Having trouble reconciling the net surplus.
I think what's
Do we just want to unmic him? Unmute him?
Yeah.
I think Alan, just the 84,000 in the budget that you see at the top, you know, is the beginning number in the prior year, which if I recall, you know, was roughly $40,000. Added to that then is the surplus coming out of last year's budget. So it's the combination of the two that get us the starting balance of 85,000, if that's helpful to your question. What we did provide you is the beginning number the prior year. I think that's where there
was a pre-existing balance.
Yeah, there was a pre-existing balance, exactly.
Okay, here's my question. My question is, in the first column on the budget page, on the gold column, it shows income of 750,000 and expenses of 760,000. And to my mind, that's adds up to a net loss
of negative 69. That's of 6,900. That's right.
Yeah, but when we did the summary of budget versus actual for last year, we ended up with a net surplus for last year. On page.
Yeah. That's a good question.
Next.
Let me follow up on that. I got to get into the details of that. That's a good question. I see what you're saying. See, we've got 17,000 here. I got it. Alan, let me follow up with that. I'm sure it's just accounting, but let me follow up with that.
Yeah, I see that. That's the budget versus actual.
The blue is or the yellow is the actual.
No, he's talking about this number.
But he's comparing it then to this number,
which is the budget figure.
Budget to budget. Actual. Budget to budget.
Versus actual.
Gotcha.
Yeah, Alan, it's a good question. I'm sure it's just a carryover. I'll follow up.
Thank you.
The good news is we're in a good spot, but we do want to make sure that all these numbers tick and tie.
Okay.
Other questions?
Other questions?
You know what it is?
You can have it figured out before.
It's the capital budget, the $25,000 capital budget allocation is, anyways, it's.
Yeah, let's just answer that.
Well, it's still not totally ticking in time because it's 7,400 versus 6,900. We just
need to follow up.
We're not $500 off.
All right. Okay. Have we gotten any more questions?
It doesn't appear so.
Bruce.
Thank you from Bruce in regards to Social Ministry Committee for continued 11% benevolence giving.
Yeah, great.
Where I think if nothing else in this budget communicates our optimism about this next year in these days, that number does. We feel that we're in a strong position and are excited to keep the benevolence where it was. And so thank you to Bruce for that comment.
And just to reiterate again that the Finance Committee does meet on a monthly basis. We're monitoring the financials very closely. We do have, you know, we have options if things turn sideways, but we're everything that's coming in right now has been coming in very positive. So we're looking toward the future with a lot of hope and optimism. All right, so I think what we'll do then is take a vote on this proposed budget. So again, we need
it's moved by the council actually, so we need a second.
Okay, so we already have a motion because the council has moved to approve this. So we need a second in the chat window. Lots of seconds. Scott and Mary Hannah Weir came in very quickly, so great. All right, so
this is kind of fun.
Yeah. So now, as
can you put this? Oh, yep.
With the.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Thank you. So now we're going to vote by a raising of hands again. So I will ask all in favor, please raise your hand and keep it up until I ask you to lower it. All in favor? All right, you can lower your hands, and then I will ask any opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, so based on that, I would say we have an approved budget for the next fiscal year. Thank you.
Yay. Good.
All right, the next item on the agenda is the report from the nominating committee. And I'd like to take this time to thank the nominating committee, who is made up of, led by Mark Cravens. And also on the committee was Katie Siegel, outgoing church council member, Miriam Teeter, and Marjorie Khosrovi. And the work of this nominating committee is to review whose term is currently ending this year, and contact them, find out if they want to continue for a second term, and then fill any vacant positions. And so special thanks to the nominating committee for their work this year. And as you can see, they're proposing the following slate of candidates to serve: Jerry Phillips and Eric continuing on the council in their second term, and then Yvonne and Ilsa joining for their first term. So with that, we will invite a motion in the chat window to approve the current slate and proposed candidates from the nominating committee. All right, Scott and Mary, quick.
Like
so nice job. Do we have a second? And Gretchen seconds. Very good. So again, we'll go back to the videos, and we will ask everybody who, if you want to proceed and approve of this motion, please. So those in favor, please raise your hands and keep your hands raised. All right, you can lower your hands. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. All right, it looks like the motion has been approved. Thank you to everyone, and welcome Yvonne and Ilsa to the council. Thank you, Jerry and Eric, for your second terms, and I really want to especially thank Katie Siegel and Wally Ryer for their time on the council as well. All right, next order of business, which is
the hardest.
One of the last items is we need to get 3 volunteers to be next year's nominating committee. And there's a couple of items here that I'll just mention. The 3 volunteers cannot be current council members or staff members and cannot be family members of current council members or staff members. And I know Kyle really wanted to volunteer, but he can't. So sorry.
We'll change the Constitution for that.
And if I by chance forgot to say Miriam Teeter was on the nominating committee last year, I apologize. I thought I mentioned her name. So special thanks to Miriam for last year. So so we're looking for 3 volunteers for next year's nominating committee. It is one of the easiest jobs you can do because it is a very short assignment. You do it just for a couple weeks, and I'm not even sure there were any actual meetings. Maybe a meeting or 2 that went into it. So
I would say, Mark, do you want to say a quick word about how great a job it is and how everybody should sign on and do it?
It's a great job, and everybody should sign on and do it. No, actually, it is a lot of fun. It has to be done with a bit of care, and we had a great team. We had Miriam and Marjorie had a lot of experience, and that really helped us move forward. We've got a great congregation with all sorts of vibrant people. So the toughest thing is making the choices, but there's a lot of great spirit out there, and I hardly recommend it.
Good deal. Thanks, Mark. And
Julie Buckley raised her hand.
Julie Buckley.
Let's confirm that Julie has volunteered.
Maybe Julie can chime in the chat window and verify that.
She raised her hand again.
Hey, there you go.
We've confirmed. Thank you, Julie.
We don't know the answer to that question, Gail.
Marilyn Aiden.
Marilyn Aiden.
Marilyn Aiden, thank you.
4 people's terms will end, but how many of them are second term? And
oh, it says it on the thing. So terms ending 2021, that we know for sure we will at least have 1 outgoing member because Jane will be finishing her second
so at
term.
minimum 1.
Marjorie.
Yeah.
And Marjorie says it again. Yay.
Okay.
So thank you to Julie, Marilyn, and Marjorie for being on next year's nominating committee. And you will be joined with an outgoing council member as well. So
conceivably Jane.
Yes.
Good. So we need to
vote on this as well. So again, we need to do another vote. So we'll need a motion for the 3 members that have volunteered to accept them as the nominating committee. Steve has so moved. And seconded by Katie.
You see,
there is a question here about, can members of the nominating committee serve 2 consecutive years?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. It probably wouldn't hurt to have someone else do it, although I appreciate Marjorie's enthusiasm.
Let me, well, I don't want to take too much credit. I was like tagging along, so.
Well, maybe if it's agreeable to Marjorie, why don't we see if there's an additional.
Let me know. Let me know. Let me know.
And if we could get 1 more volunteer, and just as a quick reminder, the meeting doesn't end until this happens. So just so you know. So if you chime in
Lois Hall.
Lois Hall. Excellent.
Great. Thank you, Lois. All right, so sorry, because the slate has changed, I'm going to ask for a new motion. So Julie Buckley, Marilyn Aiden, and Lois Hall, can somebody please move for that? All right, Steve moved again, great. And second, we got. All right, great, very good. So again, we ask those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand, keep your hand raised. All right, you can lower your hands. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. All right, then the motion has been passed based on that. So thank you, everyone. We will now pass it over to Pastor Friederike for a closing prayer.
Before I close in prayer, I have to say it is so good to see so many faces. I haven't seen that many of you since the lockdown started. So it really warms my heart to see all of you. Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you for this possibility and this opportunity to gather together in these days. And in these trying days, with the pandemic going on, with wildfires around us, with racism and injustice, we see that it's sometimes hard to feel blessed and to see your blessings. But looking back in our lives and also looking at the past year for our congregation, we see a lot of proof that we have been blessed, and we know that you have been walking with us. So thank you. Please continue to walk with us, guide us, and make us your hearts and hands and eyes in this world, especially in these days. Amen.
Amen. All right, the last item is that we need a motion to adjourn the meeting. Erica and Ryan Riddle moved, and we need a second.
Actually, there's two of them in that house.
Oh, there we go. Steve has seconded. So, the meeting is officially adjourned. Thank you again, everyone, for joining and for your patience as we worked through the details here on the Zoom technology. But I appreciate everybody's involvement. And at any point, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself, Wyatt, Pastor Matt, the entire staff. Love to have more conversations with you. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you all.
Peace.